Madam President, I rise today to address the tragic events in Orlando, Florida. In the early hours of Sunday, a gunman walked into Pulse, a popular, crowded LGBT nightclub on Latin night, and opened fire, taking the lives of 49 people and wounding 53 more in an act of terror that has been called the worst mass shooting in American history. It is also the deadliest attack on lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender on their community that our nation has ever known. State and federal authorities are continuing their investigation into the assailant and his motives. This was Latin night, and I believe that 44 of the surnames of those who died were Latino. According to the FBI, the shooter had previously been investigated for potential ties to terrorist organizations, and during the attack, the shooter called authorities and pledged his allegiance to ISIL. We must do everything in our power to eradicate this evil and to combat recruitment and radicalization, and we must make sure that our efforts and our rhetoric do not scapegoat an entire community based on the actions of a single sick individual. The investigation is ongoing and many details are still emerging, but we know this: the 49 men and women who lost their lives on Sunday night were murdered by a man with hate in his heart, perhaps even hate directed within, and with an assault weapon in his hand. Madam President, following each and every tragic shooting, one thought haunts me, and that is that we in Congress are failing the American people. We have failed to answer their repeated calls to address gun violence in this country. We have failed to take steps necessary to make our communities safer, and as a result, we are complicit in creating the circumstances that give rise to these events. We can't pretend that this part isn't on us. Now, our state of Minnesota has a proud tradition of responsible gun ownership. Generations of Minnesotans have learned to hunt from their parents, their grandparents, their aunts and uncles, friends and neighbors. But when I speak to constituents on this issue, the message is clear. Minnesotans want Congress to take common sense steps to reduce gun violence and ensure their families' safety. There is a balance to be struck here, and I strongly believe that we are capable of striking that balance. And the Second Amendment doesn't protect the rights of everyone to carry whatever weapon he likes in any place he wishes for whatever purpose he wants. The Second Amendment does not entitle criminals, potential terrorists, or people with serious mental illness to carry guns. It does not entitle Americans to own guns designed to slaughter scores of people in seconds. We can't turn back time. We can't bring back the lives that we've lost. But for God's sakes, what is it going to take? How many tragedies like this does this nation have to endure before we find the moral conviction to do something about gun violence? It is important for us to acknowledge not just how this atrocity was committed, but who the gunman targeted and where. In his remarks on Sunday, President Obama rightly drew the nation's attention to the site of this most recent tragedy, to Pulse. a gay nightclub that Barbara Poma opened to honor the memory of her brother John, whom she lost to AIDS years earlier. Barbara explained that her family was strict and had a strong sense of tradition. Being gay was frowned upon. Coming out could not have been easy for John, but when he did, his family welcomed him with acceptance and with love. Pulse was named for John's heartbeat, and it was a place, according to his sister, where he was, quote, kept alive in the eyes of his friends and his family. In describing the shooting, President Obama explained that, quote, the place where they were attacked is more than a nightclub. It is a place of solidarity and empowerment, where people have come together to raise awareness, to speak their minds, and to advocate for their civil rights. But it is also important to note that, like so many of the bars and nightclubs serving the LGBT community, Pulse was a place where people have come together to feel safe. Like the historic Stonewall Inn in New York City, the birthplace of the gay rights movement, to Bar 19, a pub in Loring Park that has served Minneapolis' gay community since 1952. Pulse was a sanctuary. Not everyone is welcomed by their family and their friends with acceptance and love. Even today, not everyone is able to walk down the street holding the hand of their loved one without fear. For those in search of solidarity and community, for those in search of safety, Pulse provided refuge. Regrettably, even today, that refuge is sorely needed. Despite long overdue victories, leaders in the LGBT movement have perceived an increase in violence directed against their community. LGBT Americans continue to face threats, intimidation, and violence in the street, in the workplace, and at school. And by and large, they remain vulnerable to discrimination. As Americans come together in the days and weeks ahead, as we seek comfort and community at Pride celebrations and candlelight vigils, it is incumbent upon all of us, but most especially policymakers, to do everything in our power to change the culture of hate, to pursue a more equal union. It is simply unacceptable that in 28 states, including Florida, there are no protections to prevent a survivor of the Orlando attack from being fired just because he's gay. In 28 states, including Florida, there are no protections to prohibit a homeless shelter from turning away a survivor of the Orlando attack because she is a lesbian. In 29 states, including Florida, there are no protections to prevent a business from refusing service to a survivor of the Orlando attack because she is transgender. That isn't right. This is not who we are as a country, and it must change. Congress must take up and pass the Student Non-Discrimination Act to protect our children in our schools. And Congress must take up and pass the Equality Act to make clear that discrimination and hate have no place in our workplaces, in our homes. I was around 10 years old at the height of the civil rights movement. My family used to watch dinner watching TV on plates we had tray tables and we'd watch the news. And I remember seeing We'd see footage of police in the South sicking dogs on black civil rights demonstrators, going after them with fire hoses and billy clubs. And I never will forget my dad pointing at our television screen and saying to me and my brother, "No Jew can be for that. No Jew can be for that." It was obvious to him, as it should be to all of us, that when some members of our communities face injustice, we all do. In the face of that pervasive discrimination, that stain on our values and our history, our nation recognized then, as it should recognize now, that some problems demand a national solution. We must take action to make our communities safe, all our communities safe. We must engage in these difficult conversations about persistent inequality and about gun violence. And we must dedicate ourselves to securing real change. I implore my colleagues, let us make our laws our sanctuaries. Let us honor the memory of those lost on Sunday and the lives of those who survived by recognizing our obligation to take action. No member of Congress can be for this. Madam President, I would suggest the absence of a quorum.